I'm Jamie, and I never thought posting something on Craigslist could completely flip my summer upside down. I was 16, right in the middle where you're not a kid, but not fully grown up either. That summer, I planned to work really hard on my science fair project on local water pollution. I was all set for a summer filled with science experiments, staying up late most nights for research, and hanging out with friends when I could. My mom and I had a small, cozy house in a quiet part of town. It was our special place, full of memories. But things felt different lately because my parents split up. It wasn't just tough emotionally, we were feeling it in our wallets too. Suddenly we had to think hard about every dollar we spent. That's when we got the idea that would start all the trouble. One option is to rent out the extra room, Mom said one night, trying to sound hopeful, but also kind of sad. It seemed like a good idea. We could use the money, and it wasn't like we needed the room for anything else. I thought it could be interesting to have someone new living with us, not knowing how much that thought would come back to haunt me. We put up a simple ad. Room for rent. Quiet area. Great for students. Bills included. It went on Craigslist, that place online where you can find just about anything. It was like throwing a message into the ocean, waiting to see who would find it. Then came Alex, or at least that's what he told us. He was 22, a college student studying environmental science who needed a place to crash for his summer internship. He seemed really nice over email, even excited to help with my science project. I told my mom he seemed perfect, but I had no idea that sometimes what seems perfect can actually be pretty scary. After Alex moved in, things seemed great at first. He was clean, polite, and knew a lot about the environment, which helped with my science project. Mom thought we were lucky to have him, but soon, things started to feel weird. Alex asked a lot of questions about what we were doing and when we'd be home. It seemed like he was trying to learn our schedules. One day, I noticed my science project stuff wasn't where I left it, and another time, my diary, which I kept hidden, was moved. I started to feel uneasy. Alex's room was always locked, and sometimes I heard strange noises coming from it. He always asked about my plans, like he was keeping track of me. One night, I lied about going to a workshop to see how Alex would react. When I came home early, he looked really surprised and a bit guilty. "Jamie, hey, I didn't expect you home this early. I thought you were at a workshop thing." That's when I knew for sure he was up to something. It was scary to think our perfect roommate might not be so perfect. I got more and more scared of Alex. Weird things kept happening, and putting them all together, I felt like something bad was going on. I needed to find out what Alex was up to. So, I decided to check his room when he was out for a long time. I used the emergency key my mom hid for situations like this. As I opened Alex's door, my hands were shaking. His room was super quiet. What I found on his desk stopped my heart. There were notes about my family and me, detailed records of what we did, when my mom worked, and where I went. There were also maps with paths highlighted, and my name written all over them. But the scariest part was the photos of me he took without me knowing, with times and places written on them. It was clear now. Alex had been spying on us. Suddenly, the front door opened way earlier than I thought it would. Panic hit me as I tried to put everything back, but it was too late. Alex was standing there, not smiling this time. His eyes were cold. "What are you doing in my room, Jamie?" he asked in a calm but scary way. I stood up to him, even though I was scared. "What's all this about, Alex? Why are you keeping tabs on us?" I asked. For a second, Alex just looked at me. Then he changed. He wasn't the nice roommate anymore. He was something much darker. "Jamie," he said in a creepy way, "I didn't come here just for a room. It looked easy to target a single mom and her daughter. You were perfect for my plan." His words were like ice, but I refused to let my fear get the better of me. "You think you can scare me?" I challenged him, my voice surprisingly steady. "You won't get away with this," I said firmly. Alex's confident smirk disappeared. That's when I noticed the big book on the desk. I grabbed it and swung it at him with all my strength, hitting his shoulder. He was more surprised than hurt, but I took advantage of his distraction and ran for the door. But Alex was too fast. He reached forward and caught my arm with a strong grip. He was super angry, and the look on his face became wild. He pinned me down on the ground while he got a roll of duct tape out of his bag on the floor. Then he tied me to a chair. He demanded to know where we kept our money and started searching the house. With Alex in the study, where I could hear him going through all the drawers, I saw my chance to escape. The tape was tied tight, but I managed to get my hands free. I ran out of the house as fast as I could to my neighbors and didn't look back. I knocked on my neighbor's door, out of breath, and told them what was happening. They let me in and called the police while I hoped Alex wouldn't come after me. By the time the cops showed up, Alex had already taken off. Our house was quiet again, which felt really strange after all that had happened. The cops looked around but couldn't find Alex. He had disappeared with some of our stuff. They wrote down everything I said about what happened, looking really serious. They promised to do their best to find Alex, but I wasn't too hopeful. It was like Alex had just vanished. That night, our home didn't feel the same. It felt empty and less safe, knowing Alex was still out there. My mom and I were so scared, we decided to stay with other family members for a bit, until we weren't afraid to be in our house anymore. Thinking back on everything, I learned a big lesson about being careful who you trust, and listening to that little voice inside telling you something isn't right. Even though Alex was gone, the scary feelings he left us with stayed, reminding us to always be careful. I've always seen my town as a cozy blanket, warm and safe. I pretty much know everyone, from Mr. Jacobs, who never misses his morning black coffee with no sugar, to Mrs. Green, who faithfully walks her big fluffy dog every morning. Being a server at the local diner wasn't exactly the job I dreamed of as a kid, but it paid the bills, even if just barely. One chilly evening, after a day filled with pouring coffee and slicing pie, I curled up on my tiny couch, scrolling through my phone to relax. That's when I stumbled upon it. An ad on Craigslist that seemed too good to be true. Free meat, enough to last a winter, it announced, followed by an address and a time for pickup. There was no name, no reason for the giveaway, just the promise of free meat. In a town where winters could be unforgiving and living expenses always seemed to climb, the offer whispered a hint of hope to me. I laughed to myself, half convinced it was just some sort of prank. But then, glancing at my nearly empty fridge, the idea of filling it up without spending a dime was too enticing to pass up. I figured I'd give it a shot. What's the worst that could happen, right? After all, in my town, we all look out for each other. Or so I thought. I told myself it was just an adventure, something to break the monotony of my days. I scribbled down the address from the ad and decided I'd go after my shift ended the next day. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and a tiny bit of worry. What kind of person gives away meat for free, especially enough to last the whole winter? The next day at work, I mentioned my plan to Sally, one of the cooks, who raised her eyebrows so high they nearly disappeared under her hairline. "You sure that's safe, Emma?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern. I shrugged, trying to seem more confident than I felt. "I'll be fine. It's probably just someone with a big heart, or a big freezer they need to empty," I joked, but Sally didn't laugh. After work, I changed out of my uniform and into my warmest jacket. The address led me to the far end of town, an area I rarely visited. The closer I got, the more deserted the streets seemed. Streetlights flickered, casting eerie shadows. My heart started to beat a little faster, and I reminded myself to breathe. It's just meat, I thought, trying to push away the creeping feeling of unease. I finally reached the parking lot specified in the ad. It was behind an old, abandoned warehouse, far from the cozy lights of town. The lot was empty, except for a single dim street lamp in the middle, flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. I parked my car and waited, checking my phone for any new messages. Nothing. Just me and the silence, which seemed to press in from all sides. I suddenly realized that maybe this wasn't one of my brightest ideas. I was about to turn my car back on and leave when I saw headlights in the distance, heading my way. This is it, I thought, my heart thumping loudly in my chest. The car pulled up beside me, and the driver rolled down the window. In the dim light, I couldn't make out much of his face, but his voice was calm and friendly. "You here for the meat?" he asked, and I nodded, suddenly lost for words. He pointed to the back of the warehouse. "You'll find it there, in the cooler. Take as much as you need." Then, without waiting for a response, he drove off, leaving me standing there, half relieved and half more nervous than before. Taking a deep breath, I walked towards the back of the warehouse, my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The cooler was there, just like the man said, an old, rusty thing that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I hesitated for a moment before pulling open the door. Inside, there were boxes of meat, neatly packed and labeled. Everything seemed normal, too normal for something that had felt so mysterious and unsettling just moments before. I loaded a few boxes into my car, glancing around the empty lot one last time. The feeling of unease hadn't left me. If anything, it had grown stronger. As I drove home, I felt I was being watched, that this night was far from over. But as I drove, a weird noise started coming from the back of my car. It was a soft thumping, like something was moving inside the boxes. My imagination ran wild with every possible horror story, but I told myself it was just the bumpy road making the boxes shift. Yet, the unease settled deep in my stomach, growing with every thump. I was so caught up in my thoughts that I didn't notice the car following me until I was almost home. Every turn I took, it took. Panic gripped me. Was it the person from the parking lot? Did they want their meat back? Or was it something worse? When I finally reached my driveway, the following car drove past, disappearing into the night. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The real fear set in when I started unloading the boxes and heard the noise again, this time clearer, more distinct. It wasn't my imagination. Something was definitely moving inside those boxes. Standing there, in the dim light of my driveway, with cold air nipping at my cheeks, I stared at the boxes. That weird, thumping sound from inside them made my heart race. "It's just my imagination," I whispered to myself, trying to be brave. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel that something was very wrong. I decided to open one of the boxes right there, too curious and scared to wait any longer. Slowly, I peeled back the tape, my hands trembling. Inside, the meat looked normal enough, but there was this strange symbol drawn on the packaging, a circle with lines and dots that I didn't understand. It made me feel even more uneasy. Just then, my neighbor's dog started barking loudly, making me jump. My nerves were so on edge that even the normal night sounds seemed scary. I quickly loaded the boxes back into my garage, deciding to deal with them in the morning when everything seemed less frightening. That night I barely slept. Every little noise made me think of the boxes and the meat inside them. The next morning, under the bright and reassuring light of the sun, I opened the garage to find the boxes just where I'd left them. The thumping was gone, but so was my desire to keep the meat. Something about it just didn't feel right. I called the non-emergency number for the local police, hesitantly explaining the situation. I expected them to laugh or dismiss my concerns, but instead, they were very serious. In a small town like ours, odd things didn't go unnoticed, and they promised to send someone over to check it out. When the officer arrived, he listened to my story with a grave face. As he examined the meat and the strange symbols, he took photos and made notes. Then, he told me something that made my blood run cold. There had been reports of missing pets in the area, and what I had might be a clue. The police took the boxes away for testing, and I was left feeling a mix of relief and horror. Relief that I hadn't eaten any of it, and horror at the thought of what it might be. The town buzzed with rumors and whispers, but no one knew the whole truth. In the end, the police never shared much about their investigation with me, but the mysterious meat deliveries stopped, and slowly, life in our small town returned to normal. I couldn't help but be more cautious, more aware of the darkness that can hide in ordinary places. Ever dreamed of something so much it's all you can think about? For me, that was owning my first car. Not just any car, but one I could call mine. Earned from saving every dime I could scrape together from part-time jobs and extra chores. My name's Alex, by the way, and this is the story of how my dream car turned into a real-life nightmare. Finding the right car felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Every car I liked was way too expensive, and the ones I could afford? Well, let's just say they were less dream car and more, how is that thing still running? I was close to giving up when, late one night, I stumbled upon an ad on Craigslist. It was a listing for the exact car I wanted, and the price? It was so low, I had to rub my eyes and look again. It seemed too good to be true. I should have remembered what my grandma always says. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. But in that moment, all I could see was the shiny car in the pictures staring back at me, practically begging me to buy it. That's where my adventure began. And boy, was I in for a ride. Just not the kind I was hoping for. So, there I was, emailing the seller, my fingers practically dancing with excitement over the keyboard. The seller got back to me so fast, it made my head spin. "Let's meet tomorrow," he wrote. "You're going to love this car." His eagerness felt a bit weird to me, but I was too caught up in the moment to really think about it. This was it. I was going to get my dream car. We agreed to meet in a parking lot at the local shopping center. It seemed like a safe enough place. When I got there, the car was even shinier than in the photos, if you can believe it. But the seller? He was a jittery guy, eyes darting around like he was waiting for someone to jump out at him. He kept checking his watch too, like he was in a huge hurry to get somewhere else. "Just sign here," he rushed, pushing papers and a pen into my hands. Driving home, I was on top of the world. The car was mine. But then, as the new car smell filled my nose, I started to notice little things. Like, why was there fresh paint on the bumper? And why did the seller want to get rid of this car so fast? Questions buzzed in my head, but I pushed them away. I had my car, and that's all that mattered. Or so I thought. After I bought the car, I was on top of the world. Driving it around town made me feel like I was flying. But the excitement didn't last long. Little things began to feel off. It was like when you sense someone's watching you, but when you turn around, nobody's there. Creepy, right? First, there was the smell. Every time I got into the car, there was this weird smell, like when you paint a room and the smell just won't go away. Then I noticed the paperwork for the car didn't match up. The numbers were all there, but something about them just didn't seem right. Like when you do a math problem and your answer is close, but you know you missed something important. I decided to play detective. I took the car to Mr. Jackson, the mechanic down the street who's known my family since I was little. Mr. Jackson knows cars like I know video games. After poking around the car for a bit, he found something that made my heart sink. The car had been fixed up super fast, like someone was in a huge rush. "It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone," he said. But the real shocker came when I ran into Mrs. Patel, our neighbor who works in insurance. I told her about the car and the weird stuff going on. Her eyes widened as she listened. After I finished, she told me something that made my stomach flip. The car, my dream car, was part of an insurance scam. It was supposed to be stolen, then found again so the seller could get insurance money. And now, I was caught in the middle of this mess. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My dream car wasn't just a car. It was a big rolling lie. And worst of all, I was driving it. After finding out my dream car was part of a scam, I was scared but knew I had to do something. I decided to call the seller, Mike, to ask him what was going on. I thought maybe it was all a big mistake, but when I talked to him, his friendly voice was gone. Instead, he sounded mean and told me to forget everything and keep quiet. He even said if I told anyone, I'd be in big trouble. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was something much bigger and scarier. The next day, things got even weirder. When I was walking home from school, I noticed a car I'd never seen before driving slowly down my street. It passed by me, then turned around and went past me again. My heart raced. Was this because of the car scam? Was Mike trying to scare me? I didn't stop to find out. I ran the rest of the way home, locking the door behind me. But it didn't stop there. That night, while I was trying to do my homework, my phone kept ringing. The first few times I answered it, but no one was there, just silence. Then, the call started coming with a voice on the other end, saying things like, "Leave it alone, Alex, and you don't know what you're messing with." I realized then that I couldn't handle this on my own. I was just a kid, and these people were dangerous. The next morning, I told my mom everything. At first, she was upset I hadn't told her sooner, but she saw how scared I was and hugged me. Together, we went to the police station to tell them everything, about the car, the seller, the weird calls, and the car that followed me. The police took it very seriously. They asked me lots of questions and told me I did the right thing by coming to them. They said they'd protect my family and me, and they'd look into Mike and the car scam. For the first time in days, I felt a little bit of relief. After I talked to the police, things started to change, but in a way I didn't expect. The police started looking into the seller right away. It turned out I wasn't the only one he had tried to trick with his car scam. They found more people like me who had bought cars that were part of an insurance scam. The cars were supposed to be lost or stolen, and then suddenly they would be found again, making the seller a lot of money from the insurance before he sold the cars to us. The day they arrested the seller felt like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. The police told me he was part of a bigger group doing the same thing to other people, not just in our town, but in other places too. Knowing he couldn't threaten me anymore made me feel safer, but I also felt sad for all the trouble he caused.